In a world where loud voices often drown out quiet strength, sometimes the most unassuming person holds the power to change everything. What happens when the woman everyone underestimated becomes the only thing standing between life and death? This is the true story of Sarah Chen, a soft-spoken insurance adjuster who walked onto a shooting range as a target of ridicule and walked out as a hero who saved 3 lives. In those crucial moments, when bullets flew and chaos erupted, the same steady hands that everyone had mocked became the difference between tragedy and triumph. This is her story, raw, real, and absolutely unforgettable. Sarah Chen had always been the kind of person who blended into crowds. At 32, she possessed an almost supernatural ability to become invisible in any room. Her colleagues at Midwest Insurance often forgot she was in meetings until she spoke up with a solution that had eluded everyone else. She wore neutral colors, kept her voice soft, and had perfected the art of being professionally present without drawing attention. The Friday afternoon that would change her life started like any other. The office buzzed with weekend plans as Sarah packed up her meticulously organized desk. She had just closed another complex liability case, saving the company nearly $500,000 through her careful investigation and attention to detail. Her supervisor, Janet Morrison, barely acknowledged the achievement with a quick nod before rushing off to her own weekend plans.
As Sarah gathered her things, she overheard the conversation that would set everything in motion.
Jake Rodriguez from the claims department was organizing a group outing to Rocky Ridge shooting range for the following Saturday. His voice carried across the cubicle walls as he explained the plan to anyone within earshot. "It's going to be epic," Jake announced, leaning against Maria Santos's desk. "We've got 8 people signed up already. Even got some big shots coming along. Remember Tom Brennan, the guy who just transferred from corporate headquarters? He's bringing his buddy Marcus Wright, that ex-military consultant who's been helping with our security protocols. These guys have serious credentials." Maria looked up from her computer screen, intrigued. "Sounds intense. What's the occasion?" "Team building, they're calling it," Jake replied with a grin. "But really, it's about showing these corporate types that we're not just desk jockeys. Plus, Wright's been talking about wanting to see how we handle ourselves outside the office environment. Apparently he's got some influence on the upcoming department restructuring." Sarah continued packing her bag, trying not to eavesdrop too obviously. The shooting range had always seemed like an intimidating environment to her. She'd never held a gun, never had any reason to. Her idea of adventure was trying a new hiking trail or visiting a museum she'd never been to. Jake's voice got louder as more people gathered around. "The best part is, Wright's bringing some VIP clients. Apparently, they're considering a major contract extension, and he thought this would be a good way to show them our team dynamics. Could mean big bonuses if we impress them." David Kamar, the young hotshot from the fraud investigation unit, jumped in. "Count me in. I've been wanting to try shooting for months. My cousin says I'm a natural with target practice on video games." The group laughed, and Jake continued recruiting. "Anyone else want to join? We've got room for a couple more people." There was a moment of silence, and Sarah felt several pairs of eyes turn toward her desk. She looked up to find Jake and Maria looking at her expectantly. "What about you, Sarah?" Maria asked. "Want to try something new for once?" Sarah felt her cheeks flush. The attention made her uncomfortable, but something about the way they were looking at her, like they expected her to decline, sparked a small flame of defiance. "I don't know anything about guns," she said quietly. "That's the point," Jake replied, though his tone carried a hint of condescension. "It's about trying new things." Wright specifically mentioned wanting to see how different personality types handle pressure situations. David chimed in with a smirk. "Besides, how hard could it be? Point and shoot, right? I bet even someone who's never held a gun could figure it out." The comment stung more than Sarah expected. She'd spent her entire career being underestimated, having her ideas dismissed until someone else presented them more forcefully. She was tired of being the quiet one, the safe one, the predictable one. "All right," she said, surprising herself. "I'll come." Jake looked genuinely shocked. "Really? You sure you want to do this, Sarah? It might be a bit outside your comfort zone." "I'm sure," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "What time?" "Saturday morning, 9 o'clock sharp," Jake said, still looking uncertain. "Just remember, these are important people we're trying to impress. Wright's got a reputation for being pretty intense, and his clients are even more so. We need everyone to represent the company well." The implication was clear. Don't embarrass us. Sarah nodded and finished packing her things, already wondering what she'd gotten herself into. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment researching everything she could about shooting ranges and firearm safety. She watched YouTube videos, read articles about proper stance and grip, and studied the basics of different types of guns. She'd always been a thorough researcher. It's what made her so good at her job, and she approached this challenge the same way she approached everything else, with careful preparation and attention to detail. She also researched Marcus Wright and discovered he was more than just a consultant. The man was a decorated former Army Ranger who'd served 3 tours overseas before transitioning into private security consulting. His client list included Fortune 500 companies and high-profile individuals who required discreet protection services. The VIP clients Jake had mentioned were likely people accustomed to dealing with the best in every field. The pressure was mounting, but Sarah felt a strange sense of determination. She'd spent years being overlooked and underestimated. Maybe it was time to show her colleagues, and herself, that there was more to quiet strength than they realized. Saturday morning arrived with a crisp autumn chill. Sarah had barely slept, running through everything she'd learned about shooting stance, breathing techniques, and safety protocols. She'd chosen practical clothing, dark jeans, a fitted long-sleeve shirt, and sturdy boots. No point in trying to look fashionable when she was about to embarrass herself in front of the most important people her company had ever tried to impress. Rocky Ridge Shooting Range sat 30 miles outside the city, nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills and dense woods. The facility looked more professional than Sarah had expected. Modern buildings, well-maintained grounds, and clear safety signage everywhere. As she pulled into the parking lot, she could see Jake's group already assembled near the entrance. Jake stood in the center, gesturing animatedly as he spoke, to a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying temples, and the kind of upright posture that screamed military background. This had to be Marcus Wright. Next to them stood 3 other men in expensive casual wear, clearly the VIP clients. They looked like the type of people who made million-dollar decisions before lunch and expected excellence from everyone around them. Sarah took a deep breath and walked toward the group, already feeling out of place. As she approached, she could hear Jake in full networking mode. "Mr. Wright, I really think you're going to be impressed with our team," Jake was saying. "We've got some of our best people here today. David Kamar here has been breaking records in fraud detection, and Maria Santos just closed the Henderson case that had been open for 2 years. Wright nodded politely, but seemed more interested in observing than listening to Jake's sales pitch. His eyes moved across the assembled group with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating people quickly. When his gaze landed on Sarah, she felt like she was being x-rayed.
And this is Sarah Chen, Jake continued as she joined the circle.
She's one of our most thorough investigators, very detail-oriented. The description felt like being damned with faint praise. Wright extended his hand, and Sarah was surprised by the firmness of his handshake and the genuine interest in his eyes. "Pleased to meet you, Ms. Chen," Wright said. "Jake tells me you're new to shooting. What made you decide to try it?" Sarah felt. 8 pairs of eyes on her, waiting for her response. "I believe in challenging myself," she said simply. "And I don't like assuming I can't do something before I've tried it." Wright's eyebrows raised slightly, and she caught what might have been approval in his expression. "Good attitude. That kind of mindset serves people well in high-pressure situations." One of the VIP clients, a silver-haired man with intense blue eyes, stepped forward. "I'm Richard Caldwell," he said, offering his hand. "I'm curious to see how this plays out. I've always found that people's true character emerges when they're pushed outside their comfort zones." The weight of expectations settled on Sarah's shoulders like a lead blanket. These weren't just colleagues out for a fun Saturday. This was some kind of test, and she had the distinct feeling she was being set up to fail. As they walked toward the range building, she overheard David whisper to Maria, $20 says she doesn't last an hour before she quits. Maria glanced back at Sarah and whispered back, "You're on. I give her 30 minutes max." Sarah pretended not to hear, but their words cut deeper than she expected. She'd spent her entire life proving people wrong about her capabilities, but never in such a public high-stakes environment. As they entered the shooting range, the smell of gunpowder and the sound of distant gunfire hit her senses, and she wondered if this time she really had bitten off more than she could chew. The range instructor, a weathered man in his 50s named Bill Henderson, gathered the group for a safety briefing. As he spoke about muzzle discipline, trigger control, and range commands, Sarah absorbed every word with laser focus. This was just another skill to learn, another challenge to master. She'd built her career on being thorough and prepared. There was no reason this should be different. But as she looked around at her colleagues and the VIP clients, all of whom seemed comfortable and confident, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something much bigger than a simple team-building exercise. The way Wright kept observing everyone, the way the VIP clients watched interactions rather than participating in small talk. This felt like an evaluation, and she was beginning to suspect she wasn't the only one being tested. What she didn't know was that Marcus Wright had specifically requested that the company invite participants from different personality types and backgrounds. What she couldn't have imagined was that in less than 4 hours, the quiet woman everyone expected to fail would become the only thing standing between life and death for 3 of the most important people in the room. The indoor range was more sophisticated than Sarah had imagined. 25 individual shooting lanes stretched out before them, each equipped with electronic target systems and sound-dampening technology. The lighting was bright and clinical, eliminating shadows that might interfere with aim. Bill Henderson led them to lanes 15 through 20, explaining that these positions offered the best sight lines for beginners. "All right, folks," Bill announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been teaching firearms for decades. "Before anyone touches a weapon, we're going through the fundamentals. I don't care if you're Annie Oakley or if you've never seen a gun outside of movies. Everyone starts with the basics." Sarah appreciated his no-nonsense approach. She positioned herself at the back of the group, notebook in hand, ready to absorb every detail. Her colleagues seemed less focused. Jake kept glancing toward the VIP clients, clearly more concerned with making a good impression than learning proper technique. David was fidgeting with his phone, probably texting about his weekend adventure. Maria looked nervous but determined. Marcus Wright stood slightly apart from the group, observing everyone with those sharp, assessing eyes. The 3 VIP clients, Richard Caldwell, whom she'd met earlier, along with Jonathan Pierce and Robert Manning, watched the proceedings with the detached interest of people accustomed to evaluating performance. "Rule number 1, Bill continued, holding up a Glock 17. "Every gun is always loaded. Rule number 2, never point the muzzle at anything you don't intend to destroy. Rule number 3, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Rule number 4, be sure of your target and what's beyond it." Sarah wrote down each rule, along with Bill's additional explanations about proper stance, grip, and sight alignment. She noticed that several of her colleagues were barely paying attention, already confident in their ability to figure things out as they went along. Now, Bill said, "Who's had experience with firearms before?" Jake raised his hand immediately. "I've been shooting with my uncle a few times, mostly hunting rifles, but I've handled pistols too." David Huff raised his hand. "I've been to a range once, but it was more of a party thing. Didn't really focus on technique." To Sarah's surprise, Marcus Wright nodded toward Richard Caldwell. "Mr. Caldwell is quite accomplished. Former military himself, though different branch than mine." Caldwell smiled modestly. "Navy, 20 years ago. I try to keep my skills current." Bill nodded approvingly. "Good to have experienced shooters in the group. You can help spot for the beginners." His eyes moved to Sarah. "And who's completely new to this?" Sarah raised her hand, along with Maria and one of the other VIP clients, Jonathan Pierce. "That's fine," Bill said. "Actually prefer working with people who don't have bad habits to unlearn." The group moved to their assigned lanes. Sarah found herself in lane 18, between Maria and David. The electronic target system displayed a standard bullseye pattern at 7 yards, close enough for beginners to see their shots clearly, far enough to require actual skill to hit the center consistently. Bill handed out safety glasses and ear protection, then began distributing weapons. Sarah received a Glock 17, the same model he'd used for demonstration. The gun felt heavier than she'd expected, and colder. The weight was substantial, but not unwieldy, and she was surprised by how naturally it seemed to fit in her hands. "Remember," Bill called out, "we're starting with dry fire practice. No ammunition yet. I want everyone to get comfortable with the feel of their weapon, practice proper stance and trigger control." Sarah followed his instructions meticulously. She established her stance with feet shoulder-width apart, weak side foot slightly forward. Her grip was firm but not tense. Thumbs forward technique exactly as demonstrated. She aligned the front and rear sights, focusing on the front sight while keeping the target slightly blurry, just as Bill had explained. The first few dry fire exercises felt awkward, but Sarah's natural tendency toward perfectionism kicked in. Each time she pressed the trigger, she analyzed what felt right and what didn't. She adjusted her stance minutely, refined her grip, concentrated on smooth trigger pull, straight back, without disturbing sight alignment. Meanwhile, her colleagues were struggling with varying degrees of success. Jake was overconfident, rushing through the motions without paying attention to fundamentals. David kept looking around to see how others were doing instead of focusing on his own technique. Maria was clearly nervous, flinching each time she pressed the trigger, even though there was no ammunition in the gun. "Looking good, Sarah," Bill said quietly as he moved behind her to check her form. "Natural shooting stance, good sight alignment. You've been studying." The comment was loud enough for her nearby colleagues to hear. Jake glanced over with surprise, while David looked annoyed that the complete beginner was receiving praise. After 20 minutes of dry fire practice, Bill began distributing ammunition. "We're starting with 5 rounds each," he announced. "Take your time. Focus on fundamentals, not speed. I'd rather see 5 careful shots than 5 fast ones." Sarah loaded her magazine with deliberate precision, each cartridge seated properly. She'd watched Bill's demonstration 3 times and practiced the motion until it felt natural. When her turn came to shoot, she stepped up to the firing line with her heart pounding. The first shot surprised her. Despite wearing ear protection, the sound was sharper than expected, and the recoil snapped the gun up more than she'd anticipated. But she quickly regained her sight picture and prepared for the second shot. This time she was ready for the recoil and managed to maintain better control. By the 5th shot, Sarah had found a rhythm. Her breathing was controlled, her stance steady, her trigger pull smooth and straight back. When Bill called for everyone to check their targets, Sarah was almost afraid to look. The electronic display showed her target with 5 holes clustered in the 8 and 9 rings. Not perfect, but respectable for a first-time shooter. Around her, she could hear mixed results from her colleagues. "Not bad for first time out," Jake called over, though his tone suggested he was less impressed than surprised. Bill's voice carried over the range. "Sarah, bring your target up here for a second." Every head turned as Sarah's target appeared on the main display screen. 5 shots, all within the scoring rings, with a group size that would have been respectable for someone with months of experience. "This," Bill announced to the group, "is what happens when someone listens to instruction and focuses on fundamentals instead of trying to look impressive." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks as all eyes turned to her. She wasn't accustomed to being the center of attention, and especially not for something she'd literally just learned how to do. Marcus Wright approached her lane. "Mind if I ask what your background is, Sarah?" "Insurance investigation," she replied. "Mostly liability and fraud cases." "Ah," Wright nodded knowingly. "Detail-oriented work. Probably used to analyzing evidence, paying attention to small inconsistencies, something like that. Those skills translate well to marksmanship. Shooting is about consistency, attention to detail, and mental discipline more than physical strength or natural talent." Richard Caldwell joined their conversation. "I have to agree with Marcus. I've seen plenty of people who look like natural athletes struggle with shooting because they don't have the patience for precision work." The praise was gratifying, but Sarah could see the effect it was having on her colleagues. Jake looked annoyed, David seemed frustrated, and Maria appeared intimidated. The office dynamics that usually favored the louder, more assertive personalities were suddenly irrelevant. Here, quiet competence was being rewarded over flashy confidence. As the session continued, the pattern only became more pronounced. Sarah's groups got tighter while others struggled with consistency. Bill continued offering her advanced techniques, sight picture refinement, trigger control exercises, breathing patterns for sustained accuracy. "Let's try something more challenging," Bill announced after an hour of basic shooting. "Moving to 15 yards, smaller targets. This is where mental discipline really matters." At the extended distance, the target looked impossibly small. Sarah could see Jake and David exchanging glances, probably wondering how they'd gone from feeling confident to being outshot by the quiet insurance investigator who'd never held a gun before today. But as Sarah settled into her stance at the 15-yard line, something interesting happened. The external pressure, the weight of expectation, the knowledge that important people were watching, none of it felt overwhelming anymore. Instead, it felt familiar. This was just another problem to solve. Another challenge requiring careful analysis and methodical execution. Her first shot at 15 yards hit the 9 ring. The second hit the 10 ring. By her 5th shot, she was consistently hitting the center of the target while several of her colleagues were struggling to hit the target at all. "Remarkable," she heard Jonathan Pierce comment to Marcus Wright. "Where did you find her?" "That's the point of this exercise," Wright replied quietly. "Sometimes the most valuable people are the ones who don't call attention to themselves." Sarah pretended not to hear the conversation, but she was beginning to understand that this wasn't really a team-building exercise at all. Marcus Wright was evaluating them for something, and her unexpected competence with firearms was apparently relevant to whatever that something was. As the morning session concluded, Bill gathered the group for feedback. "Excellent progress from everyone. He said diplomatically, "Sarah, you showed exceptional focus and natural ability. Jake, your experience shows, though we might want to work on slowing down and focusing on fundamentals. David, you've got good instincts but need to trust the process more. Maria, you improved significantly once you relaxed and stopped anticipating the recoil." The VIP clients were deep in conversation with Marcus Wright, occasionally glancing toward the group. Sarah couldn't hear what they were discussing, but their body language suggested they were making decisions about something important. Jake approached Sarah as they prepared for a lunch break. "Hey, nice shooting out there," he said, though his smile seemed forced. "Beginner's luck, right?" "Maybe," Sarah replied non-committally. She could tell he was fishing for something, probably hoping she'd downplay her performance or attribute it to chance rather than skill. "Must be all those video games, right?" David chimed in. "That's probably where you learned hand-eye coordination." Sarah almost laughed. She hadn't played video games since college, and even then, she'd preferred strategy games over anything requiring quick reflexes. But she could see that her colleagues needed some explanation for her unexpected competence that didn't threaten their self-image. "I think it's just attention to detail," she said simply. "Same skills I use at work." Before anyone could respond, Marcus Wright called the group together. "Lunch break, everyone. We'll reconvene in an hour for some advanced exercises this afternoon." As they walked toward the Granger's restaurant, Sarah noticed that the VIP clients were studying her with increased interest. She had the distinct feeling that the afternoon session was going to be very different from the morning, and that whatever test she'd unknowingly been taking, she'd just passed the first part. What she didn't know was that Marcus Wright had been specifically looking for someone with her exact combination of skills: analytical thinking, attention to detail, ability to perform under pressure, and natural marksmanship ability. What she couldn't have imagined was that in less than 3 hours, those skills would be put to a test that had nothing to do with paper targets and everything to do with keeping 3 VIP clients alive. Lunch at Rocky Ridge's restaurant was an unexpectedly tense affair. The facility's dining area overlooked the outdoor ranges where more advanced shooters practiced with rifles and tactical scenarios. Sarah sat with her colleagues at one table, while Marcus Wright and the VIP clients occupied a table across the room, engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion. Jake was in full damage control mode, clearly frustrated that the morning hadn't gone according to his plan. "I don't know what got into me out there," he said, stabbing at his sandwich. "Usually, I'm a much better shot than that. Must have been the pressure of having those VIP guys watching." David nodded emphatically. "Exactly. It's completely different when you've got an audience. I bet if we were just shooting casually, the results would be totally different." Maria looked uncomfortable with the conversation. "I thought everyone did fine, especially Sarah. That was really impressive for her first time." "Lucky day," Jake muttered. "Wait until this afternoon when they probably make things more challenging. That's when experience really counts." Sarah listened to the conversation while keeping an eye on the VIP table. Richard Caldwell seemed to be making some kind of presentation, using his phone to show Wright and the others what looked like documents or photos. Their body language suggested serious business rather than casual lunch conversation. "Sarah," Maria said, interrupting her observation, "what do you think they're planning for this afternoon?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Step outside for a moment. Come alone." "MW?" Sarah stared at the message, recognizing the initials. Marcus Wright wanted to speak with her privately. "I'll be right back," she told her colleagues. "Just need to take a quick call." She walked outside to find Wright waiting by a picnic table near the outdoor range. His expression was more serious than she'd seen all morning. "Sarah, I need to be direct with you about something," he began without preamble. "This morning wasn't really about team building or impressing clients. It was an evaluation, and you performed exactly the way I hoped you would." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What kind of evaluation?" Wright gestured for her to sit across from him at the picnic table. "Those 3 men you've been calling VIP clients?" "They're not clients at all. They're federal agents working on a case that's been developing for months. I brought them here to assess your company's personnel for potential recruitment into a very specific situation." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Recruitment for what? There's been a credible threat against a protected witness who's scheduled to testify next week in a major organized crime case. The witness has specifically requested female protection, something about feeling more comfortable with a woman on the security team. The problem is, most female agents with tactical training are already assigned to other critical operations. Sarah's mind raced.
You're talking about me?
"You want me to provide protection for a federal witness?" Not exactly provide protection, that's still our job. But we need someone who can blend into civilian environments, who has analytical skills, and who can handle weapons competently if the situation demands it. Someone the bad guys wouldn't immediately identify as a threat. Wright leaned forward, his expression intense. Sarah, everything you demonstrated this morning, the attention to detail, the ability to stay calm under pressure, the natural marksmanship ability, those are exactly the qualities we need. Plus, your background in insurance investigation means you're already trained to notice things other people miss. This is insane, Sarah said quietly. I'm not trained for this kind of thing. I investigate insurance fraud, not violent criminals. The skills are more similar than you think. Both require patience, observation, and the ability to piece together information from incomplete evidence. The only difference is the stakes. Sarah looked back toward the restaurant where her colleagues were still eating lunch, completely unaware that their weekend outing had turned into some kind of covert recruitment operation. What exactly would this involve?
The witness is a young woman named Elena Vasquez.
She was an accountant for a money laundering operation run by the Kozlov organization. You've probably seen them in the news. She agreed to testify in exchange for witness protection, but 3 attempts have already been made on her life. The trial is next Wednesday. Wright pulled out his phone and showed Sarah a photo of a woman in her late 20s with dark hair and nervous eyes. Elena specifically asked for a female agent to be part of her security detail. She's been through significant trauma and she feels more comfortable with women around. Unfortunately, all our female agents with tactical training are currently assigned to other priority cases. So you want someone without tactical training to fill in? We want someone who can think strategically, who can blend in naturally, and who won't panic if shooting becomes necessary. Based on what I've seen today, you have all those qualities. Sarah stared at the photo of Elena Vasquez, trying to process what Wright was asking. Where would this take place? Elena is being held at a safe house about 40 miles from here. It's a private estate that's been used for witness protection before. Remote location, controlled access, professional security systems. She'll be there for 4 more days before the trial. Wright's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with obvious concern. Actually, there's been a development. One of the other protection team members was injured in a training accident this morning. We're now down to a 3-person security team for a situation that really requires 4. The implication was clear. Sarah's decision wasn't just about whether she wanted to take on this challenge. It was about whether she was willing to leave a federal witness potentially vulnerable because the team was understaffed. What happens if I say no? We make do with 3 agents instead of 4 and hope that's enough. But honestly, Sarah, having seen your performance today, I think you might be exactly what this situation needs. Someone who doesn't look like a threat, who can think analytically, and who can shoot straight if everything goes wrong. Sarah thought about her quiet apartment, her predictable routine, her safe but unremarkable life. Then she thought about Elena Vasquez, a young woman who'd found the courage to testify against dangerous criminals and now needed protection to stay alive long enough to see justice done. How long do I have to decide? Wright checked his watch. The afternoon session starts in 20 minutes. I need to know by then whether you're in or out. If you're in, we'll stage a scenario this afternoon that tests your ability to handle tactical situations. If you pass that test, you'll be briefed tonight and start tomorrow morning. And if I'm out? Then you enjoy the rest of your weekend shooting experience, and we never mention this conversation again. Your colleagues will think you had a nice day at the range and you go back to your normal life. Sarah looked through the restaurant window at Jake, David, and Maria. They were laughing about something, completely absorbed in their own small world of office politics and weekend entertainment. A week ago, that had been her world too, safe, predictable, and ultimately inconsequential. What kind of scenario are you talking about for this afternoon? Wright smiled for the first time since their conversation began. Something that tests your ability to think tactically under pressure. We'll set up a situation where you have to protect simulated civilians while dealing with multiple threats. It's not dangerous. We use special ammunition and safety protocols. But it will give us a sense of whether you can handle the mental and physical demands of real protection work. Sarah realized that her entire life had been leading to this moment. All those years of being overlooked, of being the quiet one in the background, of solving problems that other people couldn't see. Maybe those weren't limitations after all. Maybe they were exactly the preparation she needed for something truly important. If I do this, she said slowly, what happens to my job? Federal agents will coordinate with your employer. You'll be on temporary assignment to a government contractor, which is technically true. Your job will be protected, and you'll be compensated for the additional risk and responsibility. Wright stood up from the picnic table. Sarah, I want you to know that I don't make this kind of offer lightly. I've been doing security work for 15 years, and I've learned to recognize people who have what it takes to handle extreme situations. You demonstrated something this morning that can't be taught, the ability to perform under pressure while maintaining attention to detail. That's rare. As they walked back toward the restaurant, Sarah's phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from Jake. Where are you? They're about to start some kind of advanced shooting course. Looks like military-style stuff. Sarah showed Wright the message. Is that the scenario you mentioned? Wright nodded. Richard, Jonathan, and Robert are setting it up now. It's designed to look like an advanced civilian tactical course, but it's actually a specialized evaluation. Your colleagues will participate too, but they don't know what's really being tested. They entered the restaurant just as Marcus Wright was calling the group together. Hope everyone enjoyed lunch, he announced. This afternoon, we're going to try something different. We've set up a tactical scenario course that simulates real-world self-defense situations. Jake perked up immediately. Now we're talking. This sounds like the kind of thing that separates the experienced shooters from the beginners. David grinned confidently. Finally, something that requires actual skill instead of just standing in one place shooting at paper targets. Sarah caught Wright's eye and gave him an almost imperceptible nod. She was in. What none of them knew was that while they'd been having lunch, Wright had received intelligence that the Kozlov organization had identified the location of Elena Vasquez's safe house. The tactical scenario they were about to participate in wasn't just an evaluation anymore. It was emergency training for a situation that might become very real very soon. As they walked toward the outdoor tactical range, Sarah felt a strange combination of terror and exhilaration. In the space of 2 hours, she'd gone from being the quiet insurance investigator that everyone underestimated to being recruited for federal protection duty. The afternoon scenario would determine whether she was really capable of protecting someone's life or whether Marcus Wright had made a serious error in judgment. Either way, there was no going back now. The quiet life she'd known for 32 years was about to end, and everything that came after would depend on how well she performed in the next few hours. The tactical course at Rocky Ridge was unlike anything Sarah had imagined. Instead of the simple shooting lanes from the morning, the outdoor range had been transformed into a complex scenario involving multiple buildings, obstacles, and what appeared to be sophisticated electronic targets that moved and responded to hits. Bill Henderson had been joined by 2 additional instructors, both of whom carried themselves with the same military bearing as Marcus Wright. The equipment they distributed was also more advanced. Tactical vests, communication headsets, and modified training weapons that used special marking ammunition instead of live rounds. All right, people, Bill announced as the group gathered around a briefing table. This afternoon's exercise simulates a civilian protection scenario. You'll be working in teams to escort a VIP through a potentially hostile environment while responding to various threats. Jake rubbed his hands together eagerly. Now this is what I'm talking about. Real tactical training. The scenario is this, Bill continued, ignoring Jake's enthusiasm. Your private security contract is hired to protect a client during transport from point A to point B. Intelligence suggests possible hostile contact along the route, but the client needs to reach their destination safely. One of the new instructors, who introduced himself as Agent Rodriguez, pointed to a detailed map of the course. You'll move through 5 checkpoints. Each checkpoint presents different challenges: urban environment, open terrain, building clearing, vehicle scenario, and final extraction. Your performance will be evaluated on tactical decision-making, team coordination, and protection of the VIP. Sarah studied the course layout, her analytical mind already working through potential problems and solutions. The route required crossing open ground where they'd be vulnerable to long-range threats, navigating through a building complex that could hide multiple ambush points, and coordinating vehicle movement while maintaining security perimeters. Who's playing the VIP? Maria asked. Agent Rodriguez smiled. That would be Ms. Vasquez here. He gestured toward a young woman who'd been standing quietly near the equipment table. Sarah recognized her immediately from the photo Wright had shown her earlier. Elena Vasquez looked even more nervous in person than she had in the photograph. She was small-framed and appeared to be in her late 20s, with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. She wore civilian clothes but carried herself with the careful awareness of someone who'd learned to expect danger. Elena will be your principal, Agent Rodriguez explained. Your job is to keep her safe while completing the mission objectives. She's been briefed to follow your instructions, but remember, she's a civilian who's never been in this kind of situation before. Wright stepped forward to address the group. You'll be divided into 2 teams. Team Alpha, Jake, David, and Maria. Team Bravo, Sarah and Elena. Each team will run the course separately and will compare performance metrics at the end. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She was being paired with the actual federal witness, not a simulation. The weight of real responsibility settled on her shoulders like lead. Jake looked confused. Wait, that's only 2 people on Team Bravo. Shouldn't the teams be more evenly matched? Team Bravo gets Elena, Wright replied matter-of-factly. Team Alpha gets an extra person. Different approaches to the same problem. What Wright didn't mention was that Team Alpha would be running a simulation with a volunteer actor playing the VIP, while Sarah would be responsible for protecting the actual witness whose life depended on the outcome. As the teams prepared their equipment, Sarah found herself standing next to Elena. The young woman looked even more frightened up close, and Sarah could see her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her protective vest. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked quietly. Elena glanced around nervously before responding. "I've never done anything like this before. They told me it was just training, but..." She trailed off, clearly sensing that something was different about this particular exercise. "It'll be fine," Sarah said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. "Just stay close to me and do exactly what I say when I say it." Elena nodded, and Sarah could see her making a conscious effort to calm herself.
You're the insurance investigator, right?
"Marcus told me about you. He said you have good instincts." Before Sarah could respond, Agent Rodriguez called the teams together for final briefing. Team Alpha goes first. Team Bravo, you'll observe and then run your course. Remember, this is about protection first, speed second. A slow, safe transit is better than a fast, dangerous one. Team Alpha moved to the starting position with obvious confidence. Jake had positioned himself as team leader, with David and Maria flanking their simulated VIP. From the observation area, Sarah watched as they began moving through the course. The first checkpoint went smoothly. Jake's team maintained good formation while crossing open ground, with proper spacing and awareness of potential threat angles. David spotted and engaged a pop-up target that appeared from behind cover, while Maria kept their VIP moving toward the objective. But at the second checkpoint, things started falling apart. Jake became fixated on a threat to their front and failed to notice a flanking movement. David, eager to prove himself, broke formation to pursue a target instead of maintaining his protective position. Maria, overwhelmed by the complexity of the scenario, froze when multiple threats appeared simultaneously. Within minutes, their simulated VIP had been killed by electronic targets they'd failed to address properly. Jake's team completed the course, but their performance was riddled with tactical errors that would have been fatal in a real situation. "Interesting," Wright commented quietly to Sarah as Team Alpha finished their run. Experienced shooters, but they approached it like a video game instead of a protection mission, too focused on looking impressive instead of keeping their principle alive. Now it was Sarah's turn. As she and Elena moved to the starting position, Sarah felt the weight of every eye on them. Her colleagues expected her to fail spectacularly. Wright and the federal agents were evaluating whether she could handle real responsibility. And Elena was depending on her to demonstrate competence that might soon be required in a life-or-death situation. "Ready?" Agent Rodriguez asked. Sarah looked at Elena, who nodded nervously. "Stay behind me. Move when I move. Stop when I stop. If I tell you to get down, don't ask questions." "Understood." The first checkpoint was a 100-yard movement across open terrain to a covered position. Sarah scanned the area carefully before beginning movement, identifying potential threat positions and planning their route to minimize exposure. Instead of moving in a straight line, she chose an indirect approach that used available cover and concealment. Halfway across the open ground, a pop-up target appeared at their 9 o'clock position. Sarah immediately pushed Elena toward the nearest cover while engaging the threat with precise shots. The target registered hits and disappeared, but Sarah didn't stop scanning for additional threats before moving Elena to the next position.
Excellent situational awareness, she heard one of the instructors comment into their radio.
The second checkpoint required clearing a building complex. This was where Team Alpha had failed, and Sarah knew it would be her biggest challenge. She'd never cleared a building before, but she approached it the same way she approached insurance investigations, methodically, cautiously, and with attention to details that others might miss. At the building entrance, Sarah paused to listen. She could hear the faint electronic humming of the pop-up target system, suggesting multiple threats were positioned inside. Instead of rushing in, she took 30 seconds to plan her approach. "We're going to move slowly," she told Elena. "I'm going to check each room before we enter. Stay directly behind me, and if shooting starts, get as low as possible." The building had 4 rooms connected by a central hallway. Sarah cleared each room systematically, using proper angles and keeping Elena positioned safely behind her. When targets appeared, she engaged them quickly but never lost track of Elena's position or forgot to check for additional threats. In the third room, 2 targets popped up simultaneously, one directly in front and one to the right. Sarah engaged the front target first, then spun to address the flanking threat. Both targets registered hits and disappeared before they could kill Elena. Outstanding threat prioritization. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled through her earpiece. The vehicle scenario at Checkpoint 4 tested her ability to coordinate protection during transport. Sarah positioned Elena in the back seat of the simulation vehicle, then had to engage threats while maintaining security during a simulated drive. This required shooting from multiple positions, standing beside the vehicle, through windows, and while moving, all while ensuring Elena remained protected. The final checkpoint was the most challenging: a simulated extraction under fire. Multiple targets appeared from different directions while Sarah had to move Elena to the extraction point. This was where tactical thinking mattered most. Identifying the primary threats, establishing priorities, and maintaining protection while under pressure. Sarah found herself in a zone she'd never experienced before. The analytical skills she'd developed in insurance investigation translated perfectly to tactical thinking. She processed multiple variables simultaneously: threat locations, Elena's position, available cover, ammunition count, extraction route, and made split-second decisions based on logical priority assessment. When the final target disappeared and Agent Rodriguez called "exercise complete," Sarah realized she was breathing hard and her hands were shaking slightly from adrenaline. But Elena was safe, all threats had been neutralized, and they'd completed the course successfully. Time to target area, 12 minutes, 37 seconds. Agent Rodriguez announced. 0 casualties, 100% threat neutralization, perfect principal protection. Jake's jaw dropped. How is that possible? She's never done this before. Wright stepped forward with a satisfied expression. Sometimes natural ability combined with the right mindset is more valuable than experience without discipline. As the group gathered for debriefing, Sarah's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Wright. Real situation developing. Elena's safe house has been compromised. We need you ready to deploy in 2 hours. Sarah stared at the message, realizing that the afternoon's exercise hadn't just been training, it had been a final evaluation for a mission that was about to become very real. In less than 2 hours, she'd be protecting Elena Vasquez for real. And the next time bullets flew, they wouldn't be simulation rounds. The quiet insurance investigator who'd started the day hoping to challenge herself had just passed a test she didn't know she was taking. Now she was about to find out if her performance on the training course would translate to keeping someone alive when professional killers were trying to prevent Elena from testifying. As Wright approached her with a serious expression, Sarah knew that everything in her life was about to change forever. The question was whether she was ready for the challenge that was coming next. 3. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself in the passenger seat of an unmarked SUV, racing through the countryside toward Elena's safe house. The afternoon's training exercise had ended with her colleagues being told that she'd been selected for an advanced security consultation, a cover story that allowed Wright's team to extract her without revealing the true nature of the situation. Agent Richard Caldwell was driving, his hands steady on the wheel despite their urgent pace. In the back seat, Agent Jonathan Pierce was coordinating with other federal units via encrypted radio. The atmosphere in the vehicle was tense but professional. "Bring me up to speed," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the surreal nature of the situation. At 14:30 hours, we intercepted communications suggesting that the Kozlov organization has identified Elena's location, Caldwell explained without taking his eyes off the road. They're planning to move against the safe house tonight, probably around midnight, when they expect minimal security presence. Pierce looked up from his radio. "The problem is, we can't relocate Elena again without compromising the timeline for her testimony. She needs to be in federal court Wednesday morning, which is only 3 days away. Moving her to a new location would require additional time for security sweeps and setup." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling over her. "So we're staying put and preparing for an attack?" "Correct. The safe house is actually well designed for defense. Single access road, clear sight lines, reinforced structure. The challenge is that we're now down to a 4-person protection team instead of the 6 we'd planned for." As they turned onto a narrow country road, Sarah could see their destination in the distance. The safe house was a large modern farmhouse situated on a hill overlooking several hundred acres of open farmland. The location was isolated but not remote, far enough from populated areas to minimize civilian involvement, close enough for rapid response from backup units if needed. The house itself was more fortress than farmhouse. Sarah could see bulletproof windows, reinforced doors, and what appeared to be sophisticated security cameras positioned at every angle. A tall fence surrounded the immediate property, and the long driveway ensured that any approaching vehicles would be visible long before they reached the house. "Alina's already inside," Caldwell said as they approached the gate. "Along with Agent Robert Manning, who's been coordinating security since yesterday, you'll be briefed on the defensive plan as soon as we arrive." The security gate opened automatically as they approached, apparently controlled from inside the house. As they drove up the long driveway, Sarah could see movement at several windows, other agents checking their arrival despite knowing they were expected. Agent Robert Manning met them at the front door. He was a compact, intense man with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to high-stress situations. "Glad you're here," he said without preamble. "We've got a lot to cover before tonight." Inside, the safe house was spartanly furnished but clearly designed for security operations. The main floor had been converted into a command center, with multiple computer screens displaying feeds from exterior cameras. Communications equipment occupied one entire wall, and Sarah could see detailed maps and building plans spread across a large table. Elena Vasquez was sitting in a chair near the windows, though Sarah noticed the windows were positioned so that anyone inside had a clear view of the approaches, while remaining invisible from outside. Elena looked up as they entered, and Sarah could see relief in her expression at the sight of a familiar face. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked, moving to sit near Elena. "Better now that you're here," Elena replied quietly. Agent Manning explained what's happening. "I'm scared, but I knew this was always a possibility." Manning spread the building plans across the table and began his briefing. "The house has 3 floors, plus a basement. Ground floor is our command center and primary defensive position. Second floor has bedrooms and secondary positions. Third floor is an attic space with excellent sight lines in all directions. Basement has a safe room with independent communications and 48 hours of supplies." Sarah studied the plans, her analytical mind automatically processing the tactical implications. "What's our defensive strategy?" "Layered defense," Pierce explained, joining the briefing. "We'll detect any approach long before they reach the house. If they come up the main drive, we have multiple prepared positions to engage from. If they try to approach cross-country, the open terrain gives us significant advantages." Caldwell pointed to the map. "The challenge is that the Kozlov organization employs professional operators, not street criminals. These are people with military training and sophisticated equipment. We can't assume they'll make the obvious mistakes." Manning nodded grimly. "Intelligence suggests they're planning a coordinated assault with at least 6 operatives. They'll probably try to disable our communications first, then approach from multiple directions simultaneously." Sarah felt her heartbeat accelerating as the reality of the situation sank in. "What's my role in all this?" "Elena's close protection," Manning replied. "If the outer defenses are penetrated, your job is to keep her alive and, if necessary, get her to the safe room or extract her from the building entirely." Sarah looked at Elena, who was listening to the briefing with the tense concentration of someone whose life depended on understanding every detail. "Have you been through anything like this before?" Elena shook her head. "The other attempts on my life were different. Car bomb, poisoning attempt, sniper in a parking garage. This is the first time they're coming directly for me." As evening fell, the team took their positions. Pierce and Caldwell positioned themselves at opposite ends of the second floor, covering the north and south approaches. Manning established himself in the attic position with night vision equipment and a rifle capable of engaging threats at extended range. Sarah remained on the ground floor with Elena, monitoring communications and maintaining watch on the command center displays. The waiting was the hardest part. Sarah found herself checking her weapon repeatedly, ensuring her communication equipment was working, reviewing the building plans until she had them memorized. Elena sat quietly nearby, occasionally asking questions about the defensive preparations, but mostly just trying to stay calm. "You know," Elena said during one of the quiet periods, "when I first decided to testify, I thought the hardest part would be facing those men in court. I never imagined all this." Sarah looked at her. "What made you decide to come forward?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "I found out what the money I was helping them launder was actually paying for. Human trafficking, mostly young women from Eastern Europe. When I realized I was helping finance that kind of suffering." She trailed off, then continued with more determination. "Some things are worth taking risks for." At 11:47 p.m., the perimeter alarms triggered. Manning's voice crackled through the communication system. "Movement detected, southwest approach, approximately 400 yards out." Sarah moved to the command center displays and could see infrared signatures moving through the tree line at the edge of the property. Multiple contacts, she reported. Looks like 6 individuals moving in coordinated formation. Confirmed, Manning responded from his position in the attic. Professional movement patterns, night vision equipment, military-style weapons. These are not amateurs. Pierce's voice joined the communication. Additional movement, north approach. At least 3 more contacts. This is a coordinated assault. Sarah felt her training from the afternoon kick in. The situation was more complex and dangerous than anything they'd simulated, but the fundamental principles remained the same. Protect the principal, maintain situational awareness, make decisions based on tactical priorities. Eleanor, she said calmly, we need to move to the prepared position. Eleanor nodded and followed Sarah to a reinforced section of the ground floor that provided protection while maintaining communication with the rest of the team. From this position, Sarah could monitor the defensive engagement while keeping Elena safe from any potential breach of the outer perimeter. The first shots came at 11:59 p.m. Manning engaged targets approaching from the southwest, his precise rifle fire forcing the attackers to seek cover short of their intended assault positions. Almost simultaneously, Pierce and Caldwell began engaging the northern approach team. Primary assault team neutralized, Manning reported. But they're not retreating. Regrouping for secondary approach. Sarah watched the displays as the remaining attackers adapted their tactics. Instead of the frontal assault that had failed, they were now attempting to approach the house from multiple directions simultaneously, using covering fire to suppress the defenders while advancing under concealment. They're better than we expected, Caldwell's voice reported over the communication system. Professional suppression tactics, coordinated movement. These guys have done this before. At 12:15 a.m., Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze. The sound of breaking glass from somewhere upstairs. Breach, she called into her microphone. They've gotten into the house. Manning's voice was tight with concentration. Confirmed breach, 2nd floor, east wing. I can't reposition without exposing myself to the external threats. This was the scenario they'd trained for but hoped to avoid. Sarah looked at Elena, who had gone pale but was maintaining her composure. Time to move, Sarah said. Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say. They moved toward the stairway leading to the basement safe room, but before they could reach it, Sarah heard footsteps above them and saw a figure moving on the 2nd floor landing. The intruder was dressed in black tactical gear and carrying professional-grade weapons. Sarah positioned herself between Elena and the threat, raising her weapon. The figure spotted them and began to turn his weapon in their direction. Sarah didn't hesitate. She fired 3 rapid shots, center mass exactly as she'd been trained. The intruder dropped immediately. Threat neutralized, ground floor, she reported, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. But the engagement was far from over. Pierce's voice crackled through the communication system. Multiple breaches now. They're in the building. I'm falling back to secondary positions. Sarah realized that the defensive plan was collapsing. The attackers had gotten inside the house in greater numbers than expected, and the protective team was being overwhelmed. The situation called for immediate action to protect Elena. Elena, we're moving to the safe room now, Sarah said, but as they turned toward the basement stairs, another figure appeared at the top of the main staircase. This time, Sarah was ready. She engaged the threat before he could acquire a target, her shots precise and effective. The figure fell backwards, his weapon clattering down the stairs. Safe room is compromised. Manning's voice reported grimly. They've found the basement access. You need to extract Elena from the building. Sarah's mind raced through their options. The main exit was likely covered by external attackers. The back exit led directly into open ground where they'd be vulnerable, but there was a third option. The emergency exit through the garage that led to a prepared vehicle. Elena, we're leaving the building, Sarah said. Follow me exactly, stay low, and when I tell you to run, you run as fast as you can. They moved through the house toward the garage, Sarah clearing each corner and doorway with the methodical precision she'd learned that afternoon. The sound of gunfire from other parts of the building indicated that Pierce, Caldwell, and Manning were still engaging threats, but Sarah's priority was getting Elena out alive. As they reached the garage, Sarah could see that the escape vehicle was intact and appeared uncompromised. But as she opened the driver's side door, she heard footsteps behind them. 3 figures in tactical gear had entered the garage from the main house. Sarah pushed Elena toward the passenger side of the vehicle while engaging the lead attacker. Her shots were accurate, dropping him immediately, but the other 2 found cover behind vehicles and began returning fire. This was the moment Sarah had trained for without knowing it, protecting someone's life while under fire from multiple professional attackers. All her years of careful analysis, attention to detail, and methodical problem-solving came together in a few seconds of precise action. She engaged the second attacker while moving to keep herself between the threats and Elena. Her shot placement was perfect, neutralizing the threat before he could reposition for a better angle. The third attacker attempted to flank their position, but Sarah had anticipated the movement and was ready when he appeared from behind cover. 3 threats eliminated. Elena was safe. The vehicle was ready. "Elena, get in the car!" Sarah called out while continuing to scan for additional threats. As Elena dove into the passenger seat, Sarah started the engine and reversed rapidly out of the garage. As they cleared the building, she could see additional figures moving around the exterior of the house, but they were focused on the ongoing engagement with the other agents and didn't immediately react to the vehicle. Sarah drove hard down the access road, using the vehicle's lights to navigate while calling for backup on her emergency radio. Behind them, the sound of gunfire from the safe house continued, indicating that Pierce, Caldwell, and Manning were still engaged with the remaining attackers.
"Are you hurt?" Sarah asked Elena as they reached the main road.
Elena checked herself quickly. "I'm okay. Are you?" Sarah realized that she wasn't entirely sure. The adrenaline was so intense that she might not notice minor injuries. But nothing seemed wrong, and Elena was alive and safe. "We're both fine," Sarah said, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. "You're going to make it to court on Wednesday." As federal backup units arrived at the scene, Sarah received confirmation that Pierce, Caldwell, and Manning had successfully neutralized the remaining attackers. The Kozlov organization's attempt to eliminate Elena Vasquez before her testimony had failed. 3 days later, Sarah sat in the federal courthouse gallery as Elena Vasquez testified against the Kozlov organization. The quiet young woman who'd been so terrified during the attack now spoke with clear, determined voice as she detailed the money laundering operation that had financed human trafficking and other crimes. The prosecution case was devastating, built largely on Elena's inside knowledge and meticulous record-keeping. The defense had no effective response to testimony from someone who'd managed their books and knew exactly how their operation functioned. As Elena finished her testimony, she looked toward the gallery and caught Sarah's eye. The nod she gave was small but unmistakable, a quiet acknowledgement between two women who'd discovered strength they didn't know they possessed. After the trial, Marcus Wright approached Sarah in the courthouse hallway. "Excellent work," he said simply. "Elena's alive because of your actions that night." Sarah thought about everything that had happened since that Friday afternoon when Jake had invited her to the shooting range. A week ago, she'd been the quiet insurance investigator that everyone overlooked. Now she'd saved a federal witness and helped put dangerous criminals behind bars. "What happens now?" she asked Wright. Wright smiled. "That depends on what you want to happen. We could always use people with your particular combination of skills. Or you could go back to insurance investigation with a very interesting story that you're never allowed to tell anyone." Sarah considered her options. The quiet life she'd known was still available to her. She could return to her desk at Midwest Insurance, continue solving liability cases and fraud investigations, keep being the person who blended into crowds and never drew attention. But she'd discovered something about herself during that weekend that changed everything. Under pressure, when lives depended on her actions, she'd found strength and competence she'd never known she possessed. The question was whether she wanted to build a life around that discovery or go back to being invisible.
"Let me think about it," she told Wright.
As she walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sunlight, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. A week ago, her biggest challenge had been completing insurance investigations on time. Now she was considering a career protecting people whose lives were threatened by dangerous criminals. Elena Vasquez had found the courage to testify against people who wanted her dead. Sarah had found the strength to keep her alive long enough to do it. Both women had discovered that quiet strength could be more powerful than loud confidence when the stakes were truly high. The mocking voices from the shooting range seemed like a distant memory now. Jake and David had returned to their comfortable assumptions about who could handle pressure and who couldn't. They'd probably never know that the woman they'd expected to fail had ended up saving someone's life while they were back home posting about their weekend adventure on social media. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Wright. "Offer stands whenever you're ready. People like you don't come along often." As she walked toward her car, Sarah realized she'd already made her decision. The quiet woman who'd been mocked at the shooting range had proven something to herself that weekend that couldn't be undone. She'd found her calling in protecting others, and she wasn't going back to being invisible. Elena Vasquez would go into witness protection with a new identity and a chance to rebuild her life. The Kozlov organization would face justice for their crimes. and Sarah Chen would begin a new career using skills she'd never known she possessed to protect people who needed someone willing to stand between them and danger. The shooting range had changed everything, but not in the way anyone expected. Sometimes the quietest person in the room turns out to be the strongest when strength is truly needed.